We have Nour, who's lead blockchain developer, as well as one of the main blockchain leaders we have in our conference. We have Evan Yap, who's helping to build the future of resilient identity. And we have Mohammed. Oh, sorry, Walid, who will introduce himself. So I'll give you all a chance to introduce yourself and also let us know what inspired you to work in this.
Well, I'm Walid El Guindy, founder and chief business officer of RedCap. I think most of you have actually experienced RedCap. RedCap is actually the official transportation partner with the Visit Summit. Well, I mean, regarding RedCap, we are going to develop a new business model, and we are going to go with blockchain, and this is exactly what inspired us to contribute in the Visit Summit. Because of the topics, mainly, I mean, that are discussed in the panels and in the activities, all these activities are going to build more and add more value to our business model, especially that we are actually going to introduce a totally revamped business model based on the blockchain in the transportation field. So that's why I'm really excited, and it has been actually a super experience with the Visit Summit.
Well, most of you know me. I was here just before. But let me start actually not by introducing myself, but introducing my company. So the reason why this company has been so well in the blockchain space is due to the fact that the owner of the company and the founder of the company is a person who owns the problem. This is Taufik Arruda, and his name is actually the only thing he owns. The problem with this is because he became an invisible man. And what this means is that he was born in Kuwait to Syrian parents, and during the Gulf War, it was one of the tactics to destroy civil registries. Once that happens, you have a single point of failure. All your birth certificates, which is the first document ever issued to you, that document is necessary to renew your identity and hold on to your identity. But it's a paper-based document. So once that got destroyed, he fled to Lebanon, living 2 months in Lebanon, civil war broke out. He went to Dubai and lived there for 9 years. He was sent to the Netherlands afterwards as a software developer at a trained healthcare foundation in the Netherlands. And in early 2010, he became a Bitcoin miner and working on the side. He was living in the Netherlands for 4 years as a professional. He had a home, he had a car, he was paying taxes. When in 2014, the company said, sorry, but you are too expensive. And he said, you know what, that's not an issue. I've been working here as a professional. I'll go to the municipality and just get another work visa. This was not as easy as you think. When he got to the municipality, he said, look, it's very interesting and all, but we can actually figure out who you are. You have a passport, you have a name, but there's no civil registry we can call to ensure that you are who you say you are. So we can do two things. We can send you back to Syria, where he never lived, and it was war there, so he didn't want to go back, obviously, or he had to wait for an application procedure, which is what he did. Only, his application procedure took 2 years, which means he was sent to a refugee camp for 2 years. And this is the big issue. Once you lose your identity, there is no coming back. There's a single point of failure with a point of no return. So what this means is that he had to regain and reclaim his identity, which he never could, actually. If you look at his password right now, it says unknown, unknown, unknown. And he used Bitcoins to break through the financial barrier, because, I mean, most people here know Otlop or Uber Eats. So the Dutch version was in the early adopters of Bitcoin as a payment for food. So he started thinking, wait, the food in the refugee camp is really, really horrible. And I want to have a pizza or a hamburger. So he started using his Bitcoins to buy food for all the refugees inside the refugee camp. And he thought, can I break through the social barrier too, utilizing this technology to build a resilient identity management system? He broke out of the refugee camp to went to Startup Week at Utrecht, which is a startup weekend started by Google in the Netherlands, and he won. And that's how Tycoon started. We started at the problem. We started at the person who's lived through the issue we are trying to solve. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I already had a fireside chat a couple sessions ago, so I'm not going to talk about my LaMarkaz or myself specifically. Also, I do work in Tycoon too, so that's, I'm a blockchain developer. But the reason to answer your question, why, why did I get into blockchain is just, what's really beautiful in my opinion, I think in the eyes of any developer about blockchain is how young it is and how many problems are unsolved. While in many other fields, everything is figured out, mostly everything is figured out. So you don't have a lot of room to create new things or better things. And I think we're at a moment where blockchain is still it's still an infant and needs to be, it will change dramatically over time. The blockchain we know today is not going to be this, it's going to be not even close to how it's going to be 10 years from now. Might not even be blockchain, might be something even better. So that's why I'm really in for the problems. They're really fun, I think, from a developer perspective. I'm not really an entrepreneur, and that wasn't the purpose, really. For instance, in LaMarkaz, we don't have any business operations. We don't have any, we're all developers or researchers, so like we have zero revenue. We don't really focus on business at the moment. The idea is we're just an R&D lab, so that's why we funded the entire project, and that's what I'm in for.
Thank you. So I just want to ask a quick question. How many people here are not familiar with utility tokens for blockchain? Okay, some people are not familiar, so maybe just briefly, maybe one of you can explain what those are.
Right. So there are three kind of genres that any crypto token can fall under, but they can also fall under multiple or all of them. There's utility, security, and monetary token. So security token is like a share, like securities in stock markets, for instance, in other cases as well. But also, and a monetary coin is basically a sort of money, like Bitcoin, for instance. But a utility token is, I think it's fairly recent compared to the other two kinds, and it's mostly connected to the idea of blockchains that have another purpose than just transfer of cash over the world. So, for instance, on Ethereum itself has an Ether coin, which is a utility coin used as a fuel for smart contracts. On the ANA system, for instance, that we're building, the ANA token is being used as a fuel as well for identities in a way. So these are, a utility token is simply put a token that has a utility, not just a mean of money or a security or a mean of investment as well, like an application utility.
So for the next portion of this session, instead of having Q&A, we wanted to sort of open it up to the audience, and we also want to ask the audience questions because we think that one of the most special aspects of this conference is that it's in Egypt. And I opened it with one example of, I think, a pretty strong case for how blockchain can be used to enhance a big problem. So going to the audience, and we could answer questions as well, where do you think the big areas can be to solve problems in Egypt for blockchain? And to give some examples, like is it with unbanked, with which areas? Volunteers. Who has the question?
Probably according to the situation in Egypt, I think blockchain as an effect or as an application would, responding to your question, would be applying it onto electronic health records and medical records. Since here in Egypt we need a cheap way or a cheap program in organizing and identifying problems for the poor, especially because our hospitals, our governmental hospitals, are very unorganized, and they cause lots of deaths every year due to simple unorganization that could be solved purely by applying blockchain.
Thank you. Any comments here? So what other areas? And it could be in any field, or it could be entertainment, it could be anything.
So I have a question. So perhaps before illustrating the areas, right? So we had a workshop the other day where they explained the basics of blockchain, but how do smart contracts work in reality? Like, is it something that you can utilize to replace sort of a lawyer's function or an accountant's function, and it's valid, or what's, you know, the practicality of a smart contract?
So
So the easiest way to explain this is that a smart contract is basically nothing other than a vending machine. And I think they explained it really well already before. The way a vending machine works is you put in money. So it says on the vending machine you have X amount of credit, and you look at the vending machine and there's Coca-Cola, Fanta, Pepsi, whatever you want. And you pick a number and then it will give you, depending on how much credit you put in, the Coca-Cola can. So what a smart contract is basically an if and then statement. So if I put in money, then the Coca-Cola will come out. Smart contracts are nothing other than this. You create the conditions under which certain conditions, when they are applicable, a transaction will create, let's say, a money transaction, a transaction of documents, a transaction of whatever it is. So what you can replace is you're creating a trustless way of interaction and also autonomous. So what smart contracts really creates is a really nice way of creating interactions between machines, so machine to machine and machine to human. So in terms of what smart contracts can offer is it's another way of interacting with society. Because the problem with digital interactions is that we don't trust each other. If I'm standing here in front of you, it's easy to trust because I can see the person in front of me. But you're looking at a digital space, you don't know who's there. You know who to trust. So what smart contracts allow is to have a transaction with people on the internet whilst not having the necessity of trusting the other person.
I also want to add, yeah, I'll give it back to you, but I also want to add that the current smart contracts are as limited as were described here, right? They can only react to very limited set of conditions that live on the blockchain, so they cannot see what's happening outside. That was actually our main field of research in LaMarkaz for the past eight months. We've been working on this project called D-Court, for instance, which could do what you were mentioning. You could put laws or contracts written in English or any other spoken language and have a smart contract enforce it economically, where you actually, so if two people are in conflict over this smart contract, they can go to a decentralized jury, present their evidence, refer to the contract, to the English contract or the spoken language contract, and then the jury would just, would basically decide whether who's guilty or who's not guilty or who. Yeah, so basically this will happen. We're working on this at the moment. We actually finished the proof of concept release of this, but then yes, then in that case, if we have this kind of court system, we can enforce absolutely anything. I mean, things that have nothing to do with the blockchain, trade agreements, employment contracts, marriage contracts, government-to-government agreements can be enforced. Anything that you can enforce using economics, when you say, well, if you don't do this, you lose X amount of money, can be enforced by D-Court, for instance. So that's the next generation of smart contracts. Hopefully it can include everything, even off-chain events and conditions.
Well, I mean, I want to add something really important regarding this question, which is actually answering the topic that we're discussing in this panel, how the smart contracts sometimes actually contribute in redistributing wealth, and this is actually our topic. There is something very interesting in the blockchain and the smart contract, and you guys actually can help me in if I missed any information, which called actually the proof of work. The proof of work is simply, you're actually going to contribute one way or another in the blockchain or in the network or in the community, and you're actually getting something in return. Because this is totally different than what's happening now. The wealth is actually distributed from up to down, and this is making some actually imbalance in the. However, in the blockchain, this is the power of the blockchain, and actually, technically, I'm not aware how this is done. However, the proof of work is simply that you are going to do something that you will be getting rewarded through tokens because you contributed with something. Anything. And this is how the business model will actually affect in any business model that exists right now. So any business can amend his business model to redistribute the wealth through rewarding people contributing in this community.
So did that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just if I can ask something else. So how will the future or the present navigate the coexistence of these two kinds of contracts? So you mentioned, for example, marriage contract, right? So how do you prove the validity of that in front of a court, like when you're requested by a state, right, or a state authority?
Well, so the idea is you don't need to. We're talking about a marriage contract, for instance, where other consequences are based on. So, for instance, wealth of both partners that already would exist in this case on the blockchain, right? So these things would follow the D court directly. We're talking about a change of jurisdiction. So where everything follows the blockchain or D court jurisdiction, we don't, in that case, even need traditional central courts. Because what's really great about this model is that there are direct consequences to what each judge on the jury or each jury member, each juror decides. If they try to deceive the system, receive bribes, try to support somebody who committed misbehavior on a case, they will have direct consequences. Unlike, for instance, a central arbitrator or a court system. But to answer your question, the idea is D-Code will be able to enforce things itself using economics. So, as I said, for instance, it can be much bigger than that. We can have governments make intra-government agreements, and then if they don't follow the climate change agreement, the US government loses $100 billion, for instance, and it's enforced autonomously, so there is no coming back, right? So you can create really cool stuff and have the enforcement already done by its own. But it's really, in a very extreme, distant society, I think, you could have an entire judicial system based on such incentivized court system, where the entire treasury and the government is also connected to the court. And this is hypothetically possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could happen where, for instance, if the police does not obey the decisions made by court, they lose their funding, for instance, and their funding goes to another police contractor. So they can, if it depends on the economics, right? How much can you use economics on this case to enforce it? But everything goes back to money in the end, right? It's all a question of who goes to D-Court who joins the D-Court jurisdiction, and if they do, D-Court enforces decisions on them.
Thank you.
I would like to get back to the first question, which was how can the blockchain actually help in redistributing the fortune or help in the wealth situation, which we have a very big diversion between a minority and then a big measure. So actually, first of all, it is already happening, in my belief, because if we look at how the people, for example, who contributed to the Ethereum token, ICO, like 5 years ago, a lot of them now are actually millionaires because they contributed very small amounts of money and then they became owners of big amount of money. So, for example, here in Egypt, we have a very common system. Everyone knows it. It is called the Jam'iyya, which means that people contribute small amounts of their income and then they redistribute it on a round-robin system. So, for example, a blockchain can help a lot of that. But let us look at the people who are small investors. Those people are the owners of small amounts of money, let us say for 1,000 or 2,000 Egyptian pounds. This is all the amount that they can spare an investment. With a blockchain concept, they can go and crowd invest in other well-known industry, or it can be a big company, it can be a real estate, it can be, for example, no one now easily can buy an apartment with 10,000 Egyptian pounds. But if he contributed with another 100 people, with each one paying 10,000 Egyptian pounds, then they can create real estate decent. So there is a lot of examples, I believe, that the ecosystem can help the people to start realizing why it is important, how it can help them. And when this happens, actually a lot of things will change in terms of the banking system, in terms of medical insurance, for example. This is another good example of how the blockchain can play. People can contribute together because we know that all of the insurance system can be completely replaced by blockchain. It will take time, but it can happen. So all of this happening and coming, I believe, can help to really help on the wealth diversion problem.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to add. I mean, it's not really a question, but I'd really like to add onto this, is that what blockchain can do, and I'm not saying it will, because let me acknowledge that first. I don't even know if the technology which will be implemented that is going to do this will be called blockchain, because we are far and beyond blockchain. Blockchain is one of the many forms of implementations that can be leveraged to do this. So, I mean, I myself work with identity management systems, and we believe that it's very important to bring the autonomy back to the user. So you don't own your identity. We believe it's really important that you do. And not only is this about social inclusion, it's about financial inclusion as well, which is what you're getting at. Because there's a lot of people. I mean, the unbanked is a huge, huge group of people. But there's a really interesting way what you said about real estate. So if you're looking at welfare distribution, in the Netherlands, for example, there's a company called Landlord, blockchain landlord, right? Normally, if you want to buy real estate, you need to buy the entire home. You can just buy the bathroom and rent that out. But what blockchain landlord does basically is it generates a pool of investors. You can buy an X amount of percentage in a home, meaning let's say $1,000 would be the rent. I own 10%, meaning I get $100 of rent. So you don't need a lot of money to be able to become a real estate owner. And I think what this does is it creates a new opportunity for people who have a smaller amount of investment, who have no way of entering certain markets because the threshold of investment is so high. So what blockchain can do is lower this threshold because it's a decentralized version of investment, but you still allow this to be safe and secure. And I think that's the other part which blockchain can do. So I describe blockchain with what we call the IBAN principles. And it's immutable, borderless, open, neutral, and decentralized. And if you are able to add one of those three, or one of those five, and 3 out of 5 at least, then you know that you're adding value to on a societal level. Because blockchain is as much social engineering as it is technical engineering. So it changes the way we interact with each other and lowers the thresholds for people to enter certain markets to be able to generate their own revenue. And I think that's really important to create this financial stability.
Well, I mean, I would like actually to add something very important that impacts the savings, because what happens on the blockchain that it's actually saving the middleman fees. So, I mean, billions and billions of dollars are actually done from just aggregating some data and passing forward to another people who actually provide the service and taking their cut. So, I mean, all those billions will be actually reinvested in the system that makes the system more powerful and make it actually maybe go viral, more viral. So one of the reasons that actually makes that huge impact on the people and distribution of wealth, again, is saving a huge amount of money to be invested again into the system. And because of the concept itself of creating communities, this is one of the things that actually makes, I mean, this is a sharing economy, and it has been proven that the sharing economy not only fixes the financial and profitable issues, it also actually fixes the people's being nice with each other, because they're supporting each other and getting profit. So
And-
they're actually...
yep. And they can, then going back to her question, they can create their own social contract of how they want to run their blockchain.
Exactly.
So it could be very localized, even within whatever number of people you decide. So.
Thank you. Yes, that's it.
Thank you for the two examples, EMR and real estate and Gamaya. Do you guys have any other ideas? I have a list of my own, but I want to hear what you guys have.
I think we have an issue with like law enforcement. I mean, I'm talking about, like, let's say someone is renting a place and they refuse to pay the rent and they decide to stay. So this is, I think, maybe trust that how can we get this person outside of the apartment after he didn't or she didn't pay for it?
You're talking about a normal smart contract, or are you talking about like a D-Court style contract?
I'm talking about like this is an application that we can use in Egypt.
Right. So enforcement, in terms of enforcement, blockchain smart contracts are not meant to be enforced by governments because because there's no guarantee that the enforcement will actually happen. I mean, there's no reason for governments to listen to smart contracts necessarily. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So you can have a collateral, right? You can have a collateral, and then if you don't, well, let's say it's not. Let's say it's a little bigger than that, right? You have a wallet that has all of your like everything you own, your car, your house, your other house, your boat. I don't know, everything you own, and your money as well. And then and they're all registered on the blockchain, right? And then you renting a house, and then for a couple months, you refuse to pay rent, for some reason. Then a smart contract that runs all of these owned assets can also freeze them, and they will be your collateral as part of the agreement you made when you paid the rent or you made the rent contract. So we're assuming enforcement is a lot easier when everything is on the blockchain, because you can put everything else, whether as a collateral or as a condition. You can control things and other assets and add them to the contract. It doesn't work well when there are some things on contracts and some things are not. Well, there are ways, but in many cases it won't work.
Hi. I think another important area that blockchain can add to, in parallel to financial inclusion, is Egypt's informal economy, and specifically informal trade. I think reports are saying anywhere between 40 to 80% of GDP is the representation of the informal economy. Personally, I think it equates to the GDP of Egypt. And basically, the informal economy is about trust. So if we introduce blockchain, it will really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can pass the mic this way.
Okay, I think another area which is one of the basics based on the blockchain is removing the middleman. Especially like Egypt, I think the most of the GDP comes from physical products. So and many people are making margins throughout the distribution of the value we're created. So if we have, if we were able to connect the value creators, whatever this product is, with the end users, and if we have like the partner of transportation who gets his fees, so we're making the all values with lower cost for the end user, and we are enforcing the middleman to create another values. So everybody win in this situation.
Or in the blockchain, you can standardize the middleman to certain percent, so it's not random as well, or something like that. Great idea. Just feel free to pass it around. And if you guys have any comments, just take mine.
So one of the problems raised by using blockchain is energy. So energy consumption in the world is around the globe. It's a critical issue right now, and the community of blockchain should solve its own problems by sequence to invest in this problem, especially here in Egypt. We have solar energy, wind energy, and people can use blockchain and adopt blockchain to make this transformation peer-to-peer. And this will not only make individuals generate money, but also will add contribution to the energy generation. And this is, it can be adopted in this area where we can, the Middle East can be like a center of energy generation to Europe and Africa. There is, I think there is a bunch of ICOs launched around the globe, but we need just an enforcement for it. So, is there any plans? Is there any communication between the community for this?
So from our side, as in specifically LaMarkaz, but also like there is like an industry community at this point, like multiple parties involved, and I think everybody's in this community is trying to reach out to the regulators, and we have reached out, and there is a process, and this process isn't just specific to Egypt; it happens everywhere. It will take time, but from what I've seen so far, regulators have been getting more and more responsive on the subject the more they understand it. Like maybe back in November when there was the Bitcoin Egypt sudden announcement, it was a cryptocurrency exchange suddenly announced to be found in Egypt, and then all regulators were just went crazy because they were not ready for this. And then it didn't happen, of course. But then, since the 1st of November, which was the scheduled launch date for this exchange, which never launched, the regulators have been talking, and they've been listening, and I think that's positive. But I think it's going to take time. But as I said in the previous fireside chat, we have to show good examples of the technology before even we have full and clear regulations and guidelines for the regulators to have reasons to actually implement new regulations.
And to add to this about regulation, it's that regulation lags behind on technology, and this is always true. But the problem with blockchain in general is that it moves too quickly, and it's really hard for regulators to catch up in the first place. And also, there is no really easy centralized place where you can find knowledge about blockchain. So what tends to happen is that regulators come sit down with a very biased expert. I mean, myself included. Everybody in blockchain has a really strong bias, that this is true, this is the way to go. But what's really important is to have a very objective way of looking at blockchain. So for example, you're seeing universities jumping in, doing academic research, and validating it not based on whatever is good or necessary, but is based on actual field research, doing benchmarking studies. One of these, for example, is blockchain at Berkeley that I really highly respect. They've been moving the academic space of blockchain to the forefront, and by creating, and the University of Nicosia actually was the first to have a master in digital currencies in the world. They provide and they launched also their diplomas on the blockchain. So what I'm trying to say is that we need more academically verified information rather than whatever expert are trying to say. And I think it's really important that we create these hubs of knowledge where people can come to find the people that have done the research, who can show the results of the research. Like, okay, I've done a benchmarking study between these and these and these type of blockchains. For your specific use case, I've done a use case benchmarking study. This would be possibly applicable for you, but we could explore the potential positive and negative externalities. And once you do that, you can actually go forward responsibly without just implementing it without really thinking.
Well, I mean, I would like actually to add one last thing, because I think we're actually running out of time. Regarding our topic in the panel, basically, the distribution of wealth using the blockchain is simply because everyone has something that other one needs. So our job is actually to convert those businesses that already have the big ones, or to create a new ones, to connect those people to this network and get everyone to contribute, compensating through tokens. So simply, this is what happens. This is totally different than what's happening now. Because what's happening now, we all know that it's actually like a pyramid. The whole wealth is actually, in a specific part, and then it's distributed upon a lot of regulations. That's why it's impacting the whole society, which resulted in a lot of problems. So I think what's happening now is actually, this is the correct wave that will correct a lot of things, whether in a social level, everything will be fixed and will be experiencing a new world.
I mean, yeah, adding on to what you're saying, many people consider it like the digital democracy. Pretty much, you're
Exactly.
taking out the powerful middlemen for
Exactly,
many
I
of the
mean-
cases, creating your own communities, creating your own laws, using it in applications that solve problems. So does anyone have any other great idea for Egypt? We have maybe time for just one more, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, it's not really a great idea, but I was thinking about the possibility of using smart contracts for decentralized warfare and how it could be misused to pay guerrilla armies, etc. For example, this question is kind of aimed at Mr. Haridy, because you were talking about how to implement off-chain happenings into, for example, Ethereum. So the question will be, could terrorists use it to see if a police officer was killed, that you automatically get compensated for that? And where's the risks in that?
And we'll have him comment on some of the negative aspects of.
Well, so what's that? What's on the okay? So information on the blockchain does not include any information that lives outside the blockchain, which means if someone, for instance, is killed, in that case, that doesn't really connect to smart contracts information on smart contracts or blockchains. But the point you're making is also important. On Ethereum, yes, I'm talking. Well, right. You can also put it right, but you can also put that on anywhere on the internet. But this doesn't mean terrorists couldn't potentially create decentralized autonomous organizations or basically corporations that live on the blockchain and fund operations, right? This is potentially possible. I don't think it happened yet. DAOs are very, decentralized autonomous organizations are very young, but you could have a very structured company that we can think of as a terrorist company, but they don't think of themselves that way, yes. But that really, there are ways you could potentially mitigate this. So for instance, if you have a regulated crypto system, yes, in the country where you have KYC, you have some kind of traceability over transactions on the blockchain. This is in the case where government actually recognizes blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies, so that it will also use forensics on the blockchain to try and track money. In that case, they can be traced, just like the FBI traced Alphabay on the Bitcoin network. So it's not like governments are hopeless or law enforcement is hopeless against these kinds of activities. There are ways to trace it. It's not, Ethereum specifically is not a privacy network. It is a transparent network. You can trace, and law enforcement have been able to trace a lot of illegal activity. Actually, the biggest criminal activity was Alphabay, and it was taken down.
Thank you. So we're going to have to wrap up. I know we didn't have enough time. I wanted to hear more of your ideas, but we can take it offline as well, because I'm sure you're all thinking about what are some potential ways we can solve problems through this kind of blockchain architecture. Just very quickly with the panel, can you give last-minute advice for anyone interested in blockchain or anyone wants to start building blockchain applications?
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm actually giving this advice for the businesses, for every business who are actually looking for expansion, looking for future, looking for giving back to the community, is to consider designing and iterating their business model to be designed for the benefit of the people, and actually find a way of monetization that fits in the blockchain. And this is how we are going to survive. And any business that are not going to do this, I think, from my point of view, it will be vanished within the next few years.
Thanks.
My first advice would be start educating yourself, because the problem is people simply don't know anything about this. And I think that's the main issue right now. People are talking about this, and half of them don't even know what they're talking about, and I include myself among them. So the thing about this is that if you think that you know everything about blockchain, you don't. Trust me, you don't. And blockchain is very limited in the sense that it's only one of the very various ways you can solve the same problems blockchain is solving. So what I'm trying to say is open your eyes to different possibilities, open your eyes to different versions of technology, even if it's far and beyond the blockchain. So start by educating yourself of what the problems are blockchain is trying to solve and how they do it, and try to find innovative ways to do something else. Find another way to treat the interactions between people, find another way to create maybe an innovative way far and beyond blockchain. So what I wanted you to do is innovate and think about new ways to create new governance models that are not specifically blockchain related, but use it as a stepping stone by educating yourself at first and using that to grow.
I think, in my opinion, the biggest part that most people who try to learn a blockchain miss is not the actual technology and its functionings. It's mostly the context and the why. So it's not like how this works, but why does it work this way, and why do we need this, and when don't we need this? So for instance, people may understand tokens and how they function in terms of code, but they don't. A lot of developers, a lot of companies I've seen, they don't have an idea on why do we need a token and when do we need a token. For instance, just as an example. So don't just learn the tutorials. If you're really like going deep into the technology, don't just go through the tutorials. Go through the lectures. Go through the meetings and the conferences that are recorded on YouTube, for instance. There are great lectures by founders of Ethereum, by founders of the biggest platforms, and they don't just talk about how it works. They talk about the problems and the design decisions, how they approach the problems, how their approaches are better than other approaches. You need to understand all of these contexts and the process that led to where we are. And if you want to have a full understanding of the technology you're going to build using it, because you cannot have a small understanding of this technology and implement it in your product. There's absolutely no way. You will always do it wrong. I've seen a lot of startups having a good understanding of how this actually works, but not really understanding the context behind this technology and the process that led to this technology, and they end up creating technologically correct products, but they're not working the way these tools were designed to work.
Thank you very much, and that's a wrap for our session. And if you have any more questions, feel free to ask any of the panelists, or if you'd like to discuss with me as well after the panel, I'd love to hear your ideas. So thank you.